the civilization that disappeared overnight. Thousands of years ago, an entire civilization vanished. No great war marked their end, no burning cities, no fields of bones, just silence. They were not primitive. They were not disorganized. They were not struggling. They lived in carefully planned cities built with mathematical precision, streets aligned perfectly, drainage systems more advanced than many modern ones, homes designed with purpose, balance, and order. This was a civilization that understood planning, control, stability. And then, almost overnight, they were gone. Archaeologists still struggle to explain how a society so advanced could disappear without leaving behind a clear reason. No final message, no warning carved into stone, no explanation written in ink. Only abandoned cities, frozen in time. In some homes, cooking pots were still sitting where they had been left. Tools lay unused. Doors were not locked. There were no signs of panic. It was as if the people simply stood up and walked away. But why? One theory suggests climate change. Rivers may have shifted, floods may have altered the land, but climate disasters leave traces, layers of destruction, mass migration patterns, signs of chaos. Here we see none. Another theory claims invasion, but invading forces leave scars, burn marks, weapons, graves. None were found. So researchers turned to a more unsettling possibility. What if they knew something was coming? What if the silence was not accidental, but intentional? Across ancient cultures, there are stories of great cycles, times when civilizations rise, flourish, and then face inevitable collapse. Some texts describe floods. Others speak of fire from the sky. Some mention a dark age that follows knowledge. What if this civilization recognized the pattern? What if they chose not to fight it? Perhaps they understood that survival did not mean staying. Perhaps survival meant disappearing, leaving behind cities, but not themselves. If so, the greatest mystery is not how they vanished. It's where they went, and whether they are still among us, hidden in plain sight. The silence came first. Not the peaceful kind. Not the kind that settles gently over a sleeping world. This silence was heavy. It pressed against the air, against stone, against memory itself. Long before calendars, long before borders, long before history decided where it would begin, there was a civilization that understood silence. They did not fear it. They listened to it. Their cities did not grow chaotically. They unfolded with intention. Streets aligned with the stars. Homes were positioned to follow the wind. Water flowed where it was meant to flow, never forced, never resisted. They believed disorder was a sign of ignorance. And ignorance, they believed, was the most dangerous force in existence. They called their world Aru, not a name, but a meaning. Aru meant balance. It meant knowing when to speak and when to remain silent. They were not the first civilization, and they knew they would not be the last. That knowledge shaped everything. The elders taught the children not with commands but with stories. Stories of cycles. Civilizations, they said, move like the stars. They rise, they burn bright, and eventually they collapse under their own weight. Not because of enemies, not because of nature, but because knowledge outpaces wisdom. When a society learns how to build before it learns why it builds, when it learns how to extract before it learns when to stop, collapse is inevitable. The elders spoke of earlier worlds, worlds swallowed by water, worlds burned by fire, worlds erased by storms that lasted generations. Each time, humanity survived, but each time, it forgot. That forgetting was the true catastrophe. Aru was different. They did not chase endless expansion. They did not worship growth. They worshiped continuity. Their scientists were philosophers. Their architects were astronomers. Their leaders were chosen not by force, but by restraint. The most respected individuals were not those who spoke the most, but those who spoke only when necessary. Records were kept, but never centralized. Knowledge was spread, intentionally fragmented, woven into architecture, art, music, and ritual. Because they understood one thing clearly, centralized knowledge can be destroyed. Distributed knowledge survives. They encoded mathematics into temples, astronomy into songs, history into geometry. Even if their language vanished, the truth would remain. At least, that was the plan. The first signs of imbalance were subtle. The stars shifted. Not dramatically, nothing the untrained eye would notice, but the astronomers of Aru noticed immediately. Patterns they had tracked for generations no longer aligned. It was not the stars themselves that changed. It was Earth's relationship to them. The elders gathered. They did not panic. They did not announce disaster. They listened to the wind, to the ground, to the silence between thoughts. And the silence spoke back. The cycle was approaching again. They debated for years. Some argued for preparation, build defenses, strengthen cities, store food, expand. Others argued this was the mistake of past civilizations. You cannot defend against a cycle. You can only move with it. The most radical voices proposed something unprecedented. Disappearance, not extinction, not destruction, but withdrawal. To abandon the cities, to leave behind structures, knowledge, tools, to let the world reset without resistance, and to survive quietly. The idea was terrifying. A civilization choosing to vanish by choice rather than force. But history weighed heavily on them. They had studied the ruins of those who came before. Massive cities reduced to stone skeletons. Weapons buried beneath sand. Towers toppled not by enemies but by time itself. Those civilizations fought the cycle. They lost. Aru would not repeat their mistake. The decision was not unanimous. It never is. Some could not accept abandoning what they had built. Some believed they could outsmart the cycle, control it, dominate it. Those voices grew louder. Technology advanced faster. Energy systems were pushed harder. Experiments crossed boundaries that once would have been unthinkable. The elders watched with quiet concern. They had seen this pattern before, in the ruins they studied. When fear replaces wisdom, speed replaces thought, and collapse accelerates. The final warning came not from the stars, but from the earth. The ground trembled in places it never had. Water behaved unpredictably. Magnetic instruments failed. Animals migrated in strange patterns. The planet itself was shifting. The elders called the Great Silence. For one full cycle of the moon, no announcements were made. No work was done. No decisions were enforced. The people listened, and in that silence many understood, not with fear, but with clarity. Preparation began quietly. There were no sirens, no mass evacuations. Families were instructed individually. Knowledge was passed in fragments, not instructions. Follow the river until it bends twice. The descendants of Aru never called themselves survivors. That word implied loss. They preferred another word, keepers, because nothing had ended. It had only moved. They scattered across the reshaped world in small groups, never large enough to attract attention, never concentrated enough to be remembered as a single people. They learned the languages of those around them. They adopted customs. They changed names. But they never forgot who they were. Every generation carried fragments, never the whole truth. No child was burdened with complete knowledge. That was how civilizations collapsed. Too much power in too few minds. Instead, memory was divided. One family remembered the sky. Another remembered the earth. Another remembered sound. Another remembered silence. Only when fragments were brought together did the full picture appear, and that was rare by design. They had learned the cost of completeness. In the centuries that followed the Great Reset, humanity rebuilt with desperation rather than intention. Cities rose quickly, not carefully. Borders hardened, power centralized. The keepers watched. They saw familiar patterns return. The obsession with growth, the worship of speed, the belief that technology alone could overcome consequence. They did not intervene, not yet. Intervention too early only accelerated collapse. That lesson had been learned at great cost long ago. Instead, they planted seeds. A symbol carved into stone where a future city would rise. A story disguised as myth. A melody that carried mathematical ratios hidden in its rhythm. Most people heard stories. A few felt something deeper. Those few became the next keepers, often without realizing it. There was a moment, centuries after Aru vanished, when the world nearly remembered. It happened during the rebuilding of a great city near the water. Workers uncovered stone beneath the soil, perfectly cut, impossibly aligned. Unlike ruins they had seen before, these stones showed no sign of erosion between blocks. The joints were seamless, deliberate. The builders stopped. They stared. This was not the work of a primitive people. Engineers were called. Scholars followed. Theories spread. Some said it was impossible. Others said it was exaggerated. A few said it changed everything. And then quietly the site was sealed. Declared unstable. Declared unsafe. Construction resumed elsewhere. The stones were buried again. History moved on. The keepers noticed. They always did. The most dangerous knowledge was never technology. It was timing. Knowing when to act mattered more than knowing how. Aru had fallen into silence not because catastrophe was unavoidable, but because memory was fragile. Every civilization believed itself unique. Every civilization believed collapse happened to others. That belief was the true enemy,